Well, good morning. This morning we read Esther chapters 1 and 2. This is a really weird book. It doesn't mention the name of God all through the book, and many of the characters appear to behave quite badly. The first character, Queen Vashti, actually behaves honourably. She refused to be a sex object in front of the drunken friends of her husband. She was more than that and refused to parade her beauty in front of his drunken friends. She stood for her dignity as a woman, something which obviously in those days couldn't be tolerated, and she lost her position as queen. She lost her position for doing what was right and moral. The other characters in this story are odd. When we tell this story to children, we may say that Esther won a beauty competition. But if you read this carefully, this was not a beauty competition. This was something far more sinister. And Mordecai, her adopted father, who was in fact her cousin, seems to have almost encouraged her to take part. Perhaps, it's likely they had no choice. The beautiful women were simply seized and taken into the harem, and Mordecai just wanted to keep her alive, and so gave her the advice of how to get along and how to behave and to hide her nationality and so on. But she certainly didn't follow the example of Vashti, who was prepared to sacrifice everything. Vashti could have lost her life. She only lost her position. She could have lost her life by her stand. Esther didn't make such a moral stand and went into the king and pleased him, having taken advice from a confidant of the king of what would please him. The morals of this story are very peculiar. We'll unpack it more as we go through the book. But from this story we take, here is a strong woman, Vashti. Vashti is the hero of these first two chapters, the one who stood up for her dignity and her morality, whatever the cost. Vashti is the hero of these two chapters, not necessarily Esther, though we'll see Esther later. And then there's Mordecai, and Mordecai overhears this plot to assassinate the king, and lets Esther know, lets her husband know, and the king is saved and the two officials are killed. And this is recorded. That will come up later in the book. That's just, at the moment, it just seems an odd thing to be there, but it will come up later in the book, how this is used by God. You see, God's name is not mentioned in this book, but throughout all the faults and failings of the characters, God is at work in order to save his people. And here is a thought for us to take as we go through this book of Esther. Through all the faults and failings of the peoples, God is still at work to save his people. We take two takeaways then. We take away Vashti and stand for dignity, whatever it cost. A stand for a woman's right of self-determination, not to be dictated to by her husband and not to be treated as an object, but as a person. And we take away that God is at work in this book, behind the scenes, for the good of his people. Read this book carefully. As we go through it, we see all kinds of strange and worrying things.